You ready? I'm going to call the meeting to order. Since we're sitting informally, we all have our name tags. We'll dispense with introductions and move right to public comment. Judy Kowalczyk from Ripton is here for that. And rather than staying out there, why don't you come join us at the table? And essentially, the floor is yours.
Okay.
This is the point in time when we simply listen.
Okay, great.
If you have written comments and want to email them to me later, I can distribute them to the rest of the members of the board.
I wrote some things, and I'm going to just stay on script. I won't take a lot of your time. I'm Judy Kowalczyk, and my son is Bryce, and he graduated in 2017. He is now at Colgate in his freshman year of college. Although Bryce has totally moved on from the negative treatment he received at Middlebury Union High School and does not hold grudges, I feel, and he doesn't even know I'm here, quite frankly, I feel it is my duty to bring two grievances to your attention so that no other student is ever treated in such a manner again. The first was a weird surprise. When I went to retrieve a copy of Bryce's transcript this past fall for auto insurance discount purposes, I noticed it claimed he was number 1 out of 135 in his graduating class with a 4.08. I was confused as to why he was not selected for valedictorian. Bryce's grandparents are not well and traveled far to be at graduation. They would have been so happy to hear him speak. I said to Bryce, maybe everybody who gets over a 4.0 gets the number 1 position. I don't really know how it works. So Bryce decided to look into the matter and call the school. I also called the school to follow up to make sure I had the whole truth before making judgments as well. It turned out that in the third quarter, when graduation speakers are decided upon, he was not first in the class. So okay, but Bryce's goal was to graduate first in the class. He was disappointed in himself and expressed that to me when he felt he did not succeed in his goal. It caused him to wonder if all that hard work and study time was worth the trade of free hobby time. My question is, when was anyone from Middlebury Union High School going to tell him that he graduated first in his class and congratulate him for this high achievement? I mean, not even a letter or a mention at graduation or a little blurb in the paper, anything to let him know that he achieved his goal. Why did we have to find out through getting a discount on auto insurance? Perhaps there is a better way to choose graduation speakers, and perhaps the top 5 or 10 students should be recognized at graduation. They work very hard to achieve the goal of highest honors and should be recognized at graduation when their relatives are in town. Second, after going through the Ripton and the Middlebury Union Middle School systems, feeling like the administration treats students as part of a family, I am not sure why one enters Middlebury Union High School and it is more like a prison. The administration is not working with the students but against them. Ms. Demon and Mr. Lawson seem to use any tactics possible, including deception, to snag a student for a wrongdoing, no matter how small the infraction.
Judy, remember, we're going to stay away from names.
There's no more names. They are giving out suspensions too easily. Now, since it is mandatory to discuss any suspensions on the Common App application to colleges, we are creating a block for our Middlebury students to get into the colleges of their choice. I would think we would want our students to achieve the greatest futures possible. Suspending students for small infractions, albeit rules broken, is too extreme. If someone is caught with a beer on campus or a pinch of weed in a parking lot, yes, she has broken a rule. But in this competitive college acceptance environment, do they deserve to be cast out of the cut because of this mistake? Would it not be wiser to make the student write an essay on why one should not drink or smoke, or lead a seminar on the same? Suspension really doesn't teach much. It just gives the student 3 days off to sleep late and perhaps get into more trouble. Also, with the small number of students at Middlebury Union High School, they get caught easily for every little infraction. But at larger schools around the country, it is much more difficult to discipline every typical teenager. Only the real problematic teens are punished with suspension. So we are also putting our typical teenagers at a disadvantage compared to other schools. Seeing a suspension on the Common App gives very competitive schools like Harvard a great reason to toss that application to the side, even if the violation was minor and teenage typical. I urge you to review the consequences for petty rule breaking and change the punishment to something sensible before more of our wonderful Addison County teens are overlooked for unnecessary reasons. I do believe it had a great impact on my son's, which colleges he got into. It is a very competitive environment now. I can't even tell you how competitive. And if a small infraction, and you have to put that, a suspension on your college app and explain that, those schools, those Ivy League schools are gonna, they're just looking and waiting for something to toss an application to the side. So I am urging you to relook at your punishments for regular teenagers and the things that they do, because they're gonna do these things. Especially in a school like this where it's small and they get caught for everything they do. So, thank you for their time.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Just say, as an interesting sort of add-on, the issue of suspensions has actually reached the House Education Committee, and there's
good.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic, and one that is being discussed not just here but elsewhere.
Plus, it doesn't really teach anything. Doesn't do anything. So you're hurting the kid in many different ways. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Judy.
you.
And like I said, if you want to send me the written copy, I can distribute it to everybody.
Okay.
All right, so we've got some minutes to approve from April 2nd. I want a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. Well, let's see here. I would say that since we did go into executive session, it probably should reflect that.
It is in the minutes.
It is?
It is in the minutes.
All right, I was just looking down where the appointment was made. Okay, thank you. All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? We've adopted the minutes.
Sit with us.
Finance folks, we got bills to pay?
Yeah. Mary and I read bills on April 9th. General fund total was $758,604.61. And there was a McJilton fund for $5,197. And then Mary and I also read them today. Total $1,434,119.15. I'll pass it your way. And, I was gonna mention that we need someone signing next week, but Suzanne has kindly, actually, let me circle. Thank you, sorry.
Victoria, I'm assuming you're putting that in the form of a motion?
Oh, I did put that in the form of a motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mary. All those in favor of paying the bills as reported, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And we paid the bills. The next item on our agenda is a bit of a holdover from our last second meeting of the month. Just to have a quick conversation about Robert's rules. Lorraine was actually going to lead this portion of things. She's not here tonight, but I thought we'd just talk very quickly about it. It's pretty standard for municipal boards like ours to use Robert's Rules of Order to a certain extent in sort of as a fallback to how everything should operate. And I would recommend for those of you who haven't read a simplified version of it online, it's worth doing. It's really, it goes over, moving something, seconding it, conversation. And so it sort of does act as the traffic rules for motions, seconds, discussion, and then ultimately voting. But it also talks a bit about decorum. I think that's a good place to read as well. In a strictly formal Robert's Rules of Order way of operating, all comments, any discussion we have, all comments would be made to the chair. You see this in the Congress when, they're always saying, Mr. President, talking to the President of the Senate or the President of the House, because you always face that person. I don't think we need to operate that strictly. But when we do get into sort of bigger issues where there's lots of input and conversation, it's important for the chair to sort of be the traffic cop, to call on people. And I would say that equally goes for when there's engagement with people in the audience as well, unless the chair cedes that to somebody else. So if Caitlin's giving a presentation and there are questions, first the chair should be calling on people, but oftentimes I'll just cede that authority to whoever's doing it because it makes life a lot easier. There are certain sort of rules when we have a big debate, such as we did when we adopted IB, that you sort of get 2 bites at the apple, 2 times to offer your opinion, usually 1, and then not again until everybody else has had their shot at coming in first, and then maybe a second. And that works well in a big conversation with a big audience where we're having to make a big decision. Other times where it's more informal, we tend to go back and forth. I hope there won't be a need that we have to completely make it formal. But anyway, that's the system that we use. It seems to work. Where I get torn on is, in a very strict Robert's Rule sense, we shouldn't talk about anything unless something's been moved and seconded first. To me, that seems a little much in that it's kind of good to get an idea of what you're moving and seconding before you actually do it. In the strict rules, you're not supposed to do that. You have your conversation after something's been moved and seconded. So as we go along, if people have issues with the way things are being managed and you want more adherence to Robert's Rules or less adherence, just let me know and we can have a conversation about it. We can have a conversation about it at the board level. Its goals are to keep everything from being personal. That's sort of the idea that all comments get made to the chair. To sort of keep control of the conversation, which is why the chair calls on people. And to sort of keep debate fair and limited when needed to be. It makes a good sort of fallback to say, well, according to Robert's Rules, this, and this. And so it's a good format to stick with. If we've got a different way we'd like to work things, we can certainly talk about it. But anyway, I don't know if anybody's got any questions sort of about Robert's Rules and how it works.
Peter, hopefully this will not be the case, but if we believe that someone is speaking out of order or violating decorum,
Yep.
how should we bring it to the attention? Because
So I think that actually in a strict sense, you would call for a point of order.
Yes.
And then would cease, and I'd hear your point of order, and then I'd have to make a ruling on it.
You could also call a member to order.
Or call a
directly.
member to order, yeah.
If someone's doing something, you could ask the chair to call the member to order because they're out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, as we interact with one another, if things get heated, there could be a tendency to sort of call somebody out personally when we're really here to talk about issues. And in fact, in a real strict sense, you're not even supposed to use people's names. You'd say, oh, the member from Weybridge or whatever, to keep it as sort of impersonal. We're really about the
You
issues.
gotta remember where everybody's from now.
Well, so, a lot of this, we don't use Roberts in the legislature, we use a different version called Masons. And it is very strictly formal. All comments get made to the speaker, and the speaker must recognize 150 of us. And it's very hard if it's somebody who she hasn't called on. She has this map, has to reach down and figure out where you're from, because you don't refer to the person's name. You say the member from, and you have to look at it. But yes, I think that calling people to order is allowable. And it really is, it's all about making sure that we stick to issues, not personalities, that we aren't calling out people, we're calling out issues. And that's really kind of at the heart of it. is that it's, it keeps everything at the level it's supposed to be.
I think, isn't it described as reaching the will of the majority, but giving the minority an opportunity to state their case?
Yeah,
It's kind of what it talks about, the purpose of,
yeah,
and doing it efficiently.
yeah. And
Time.
respectfully.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, where we can run into trouble is if a board member has sort of an issue that they want to have moved or has to take action on, and it's not on the agenda, but a board member moves it, and another board member seconds it. I don't think we've established a policy or a rule on that issue yet, and I think probably that's something that Perry's taking up in the policy committee. You know, can somebody out of the blue move and second something? And there are times where we're gonna need to do it to accomplish something that we need to accomplish in a timely manner. But more about that as I think we get more from the policy committee. And then the other thing is board norms, and this is really to get back to a conversation we started in September, then dropped for a while, and frankly, I'll take the blame for most of that, because Suzanne and I were supposed to work on it. And so Suzanne did type up, we had a board retreat, for those of you who are new, and kind of.
Just pass them around.
Yeah, thank you. And so we talked about kind of establishing board norms, our board behavior, and how we want to have it. And we kind of did sticky notes on a wall and whatnot. And this was kind of of what we came out with.
So Peter, you want me to talk about it since I did it?
Sure, yeah.
To this kid.
So we did sticky notes as to how we wanted our meetings to run. And it was charged to Peter, Colin, and myself to combine those sticky notes into board norms. And so what you're getting is I've worked with norms before, so I took the sticky notes and I reworded them, and then what I put, if I didn't think that I quite got to what the sticky note was saying, I put right underneath the norm exactly what was on the sticky notes. So like you'll see on, we will invite and welcome the contributions of every member and listen to each other, which is the second one. The exact wording on the sticky note was call out issues, not people. So I just tried to word it so that it was maybe just a little nicer sounding instead of so blunt. So these are what was based off of the sticky notes from last September.
If everyone wants to just take a quick read through that and make sure we're comfortable with it. You know, some of these are important, some of them are perhaps a little less so, like using humor or having fun together as appropriate. It's all good, but it's not something we have to adhere to. If we don't find a shared activity to go all have fun together, we aren't violating our norms. But anyway, I think we'll just sort of keep these with us. I don't think we need to formally adopt them. We don't have an action item for them at this point anyway. But sort of by consensus, we'll adhere to them and the rules of decorum within Robert's Rules of Order. Anything you'd like to add in terms of anything there, in terms of board superintendent norms?
I don't think so. I think I'm excited about the work that the board is doing, both in the policy committee and starting to draft some of the kind of parameters. I think it's something we talked about a lot over the last 2 years as the board kind of starts to gel and we take all the different cultures of the districts we're coming from into this new entity. So I think it's really good work. I really support as much open and transparent communication as we can have, and having I think the board having both clear parameters and strong relationships together are really powerful. In my own experience in working with boards, if it's all relying on relationships, that can be challenging because you never know how strongly people feel, and there's just a lot of variables. So I think both the structure of Robert's rules and the respect and really kind of the drive to work together for kids in our community is, you know, kind of where we're headed, and I'm excited.
You know, by and large, like especially for our second meeting of the month, which tends to be around this round table, and we're a little more informal. I'm not going to hard press Robert's rules. If you want to interrupt and ask a question or whatever, if we're having a conversation and it's a work session, I think that that's appropriate. If it gets out of hand, we'll establish those rules.
Is there sort of a modified?
I'm sorry, did I call on you?
Oh.
The member from Salisbury?
Is there a modified version of Robert's rules for less formal, or is it just?
There are
boards
abridged
and-
versions, but there's not sort of modified, less formal. It's sort of how you adopt them, or how you choose to enforce them and use them.
Isn't there, excuse me, Chair, isn't there a set of Robert's rules for small groups versus large groups?
There are, yeah. Yeah, if the large groups, it gets really arcane and, you know, you need to stand when you speak.
Oh my.
Well, that would give us some exercise.
Yeah, we'd
instead
like
of
to
sitting
do
all
that.
night.
Maybe we should adopt that.
That should be a norm. You want me to add that as a norm, Mary? Yeah. Stand to be recognized.
All right, if nothing else on that, we'll move ahead to update the full board on the master plan sort of process. Turn it over to Jen.
May I speak? So great. We're really excited to share our progress to this point. First, I wanted to introduce Bob Mason, who's been working with us remotely at sometimes and in person sometimes, and I wanted to give him the chance to let his voice be heard for a few minutes and give a brief introduction.
I'll be brief. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm in a past life before I retired. I was a school business manager in Vermont and a board member in Vermont and a board chair in Vermont, and entered retirement last year in June. Peter called me in January and asked if I wouldn't come out of retirement in support of your master planning effort, and I enthusiastically said yes without hesitation. I look forward to the work and look forward to the group, and we're heading a good direction. And I'm there as an assist and as a facilitator, I think, and try and keep us all out of trouble. But it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so he's been providing some great guidelines for us to kind of keep us organized, but really good at listening to the committee's opinions and putting those into more official terms. So hopefully you can all see this master plan draft and get into it.
You should be able to get to it if you click on it from Board Pack.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
it's
just
on
click there. I gave you all access, I hope. Did anybody have a chance to look at it ahead of time? I just kind of want to know, I don't want to exhaust you by going through it. So our thought is to just briefly go through it and kind of hold questions till the end if possible, and then have a bit of a question-answer discussion about where we are and where we're going. Yeah? Okay. So the first portion, the ACSD master planning process, is actually more of the lead up to why we're doing this, right? So the history of how we became the consolidated or unified district. Oh, and by the way, if we did edit this in our committee meeting, so if any of you have a printed version, that's obsolete at this point. So there might have been some words or some phrases that you didn't agree with. So this is slightly edited. It was slightly edited on the fly, like I mentioned might happen at our big meeting last month. So yeah, we changed, I think that was at the consolidation to unified was the big change in that paragraph, second paragraph. And then the master planning mission and goals, that was really what our committee had worked on before even Bob came. I think he gave us some wordsmithing based on our bigger mission that we'd had, and the goals are pretty specific. They could get more specific, but those were some of the main ideas that we had all talked about wanting to keep in mind as we went into this process.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second.
Sure
This is
thing.
a working document for the board to use as we kind of go through the process.
Okay. And then on the next page, the 5-phase process of master planning. This is really our process moving forward, and what our committee has done and is hoping to do over the course of the next year, essentially. So phase 1 is pretty much what we've already done. We've established our goals, this process, and working with our committee and the board to get together to get an agreement of what those goals and process are, which is now. Phase 2, which already kind of started with the data gathering, and then we'll continue over the next few months with looking at that data and assessing that data to answer the questions of where are we now, and then sharing, well, I'll stop there. So just answering that question, where are we now? We have a huge long list of data that we've requested. We'll see how far that gets, but Bob and Peter and the team are working diligently to look at that data and not give us something that's overwhelming, but something that is digestible. And then we're hoping in the fall that we have something that makes sense to share with the community. And so that's all I'll say about that, because there's some more information below about the next part. So then after we share with the community, we'll get some feedback, and we will actually start drafting what we see as a master plan. We'll share that with the board, of course, and we think, again, with the community. I'm not sure what that format will look like. It might just be in online or in paper. I'm not sure if there'll be forums at that point. And then revise as needed, and hopefully the board will adopt that plan. And then in this, by the end of that year, by the spring, we'll have some items that we can implement. And the main point that we wanted to emphasize with that is that it's not sort of this is, step 1 through 10. It's something to be reviewed annually. It's a living document that can evolve over time. Are you dying to ask a question yet? Or tell me something that you want changed?
I thought we were supposed to wait to the end.
I know, I'm just wondering if you're like counting it. You're being so obedient and quiet.
Are you saying that Steve normally isn't?
No, I'm not saying just you in particular. He's like an answer. We're totally out of order. All right,
I got to get a gavel.
Yeah, I think you
That's
should.
what the
You
whole
can just
problem
snap.
with our meetings.
All right, so we're getting there. So the ACSD Master Planning Community Engagement. So this is where I started to talk on the last page to get into the details of it, and then I remembered we actually have a whole big page about it. Is everybody with me? You know where I am? Okay, great. This has changed if you read it before. So we simplified this first section just to give our overview of it, that it would be reaching out to and connecting with parents, residents, staff, meaning the ACSD staff, and students, basically utilizing stages 2 through 4 that we described above. And the goal that we have is holding 3 community forums, utilizing a facilitator. But as you see in the bullet points, we would all be actively involved in that as well. and that would happen in the fall. And we're envisioning inviting all ACSD community to each of those forums. It wouldn't be sort of a town-based forum. And that we would, what are we saying there? Utilizing like a community member or community members that we think might be key. This just came up, sorry, that's why it's a little fresh in my brain. To help us think of and plan for how to best get people to come to those meetings and what might be a good way to engage the community. So the agenda roughly is listed there. I don't think I need to read all of that. You probably had a chance to go through it. But it's basically sharing data in a facilitated way and then breaking into small groups, changing on the fly. And I think we were anticipating that board members would be at each of those small group discussions to help the conversation and potentially to take notes, lead questions. And it mentions that we have a project website to post schedules and feedback. Caitlin and I have been working on that. We have a draft that we just talked about in our last meeting. So hopefully we can get at least some version of the website up soon so people can see what's happening. Did it talk about the flyer there too?
I don't think so.
Okay. So we're also working on creating a publicity flyer to get the word out before the summer. And with hopefully, that's what we're going to talk about next month, is the dates of those forums, if we can schedule them before the end of the school year. And then something a little bit more detailed that people can maybe hold on to at the forums. All right, do we want to get into that piece? The next piece is the committee charge. Is this the part that has to actually be like a motion, or do we?
Well, so
go into it?
what we thought is that because this committee has sort of changed its focus in the past 2 years, it really kind of needs a new formal charge, and do that in the form of a motion and a second. So be looking for, well, first of all, why don't we take questions and see if people have any thoughts and comments before we go ahead with the formal charge.
Okay.
One thing I would just point out, I think we pointed it out previously, but no one else in Vermont has had a master plan that we've been able to find. So we're kind of out there flying alone. There are other master plans out there, but they're highly detailed. They're usually to promote, tens of millions of dollars in spending. So, we're kind of making it up as we go along.
Yeah, that was part of our initial research when we started meeting about this in the last fall and winter. We were looking at we call them sample master plans, and if you look in the master planning shared drive, which you all have access to now, you can kind of see some of that background research and looking at other websites and their master plans. And we found some smaller schools in the Massachusetts, Connecticut area that gave us some idea of what we were looking for, and that's what helped us form our mission and goals. But like Peter said, there's not really something that we can really say this is, especially in Vermont, would be lovely because they're facing a lot of the same situations that we are. Something that was comparable. A lot of it was just a way to get funding for a new school, which is not, because they have higher enrollment and they need in declining schools and needing a bigger school, and that's not the situation that we were in.
Yeah, you don't find master plans for contracting school districts. It's kind of interesting.
It's a good thing we're expanding, huh?
Which I would think you would need
Right.
more of a master plan for a contracting district than a growing one.
Yeah. In Massachusetts, there was maybe one that was talking about that, but it definitely wasn't this very similar situation to ours. But they did talk about one of the school areas had a declining enrollment. But we're talking about a town with multiple schools as opposed to multiple towns, and that's
right.
where we're different, and that's a really Vermont thing that we're dealing with compared to what we were finding online.
Barry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm still struggling to understand how our strategic plan, which we talked about briefly, and our master plan dovetail, and it feels like it's replacing the strategic plan, and yet there's so many things that we have to do in this. So there's a
Well,
connection.
I'll attempt to answer that, and then you'll correct me. But I think bottom line, first of all, I think it's, the strategic plan is really an administrative plan about how we're going to educate, what are our goals for educating our kids, and how do we get there. It was largely developed from the administration level down, and I think probably has much more to do with education. And frankly, this really has more to do with facilities than education. We're really talking about looking at where we are today in terms of what we have for facilities, what we have for students, cost, and where we would like to be to both address that, but also create optimum educational spaces.
Utilizing the strategic plan. So I think that's where it ties to that. We're not redefining the goals.
Here's part of my problem is I worry about communication with our community. And we go out and they say, wait, don't you have a strategic plan? And it's very subtle.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious that this is brick A and this is brick B. I mean, they're kind of different. And yet, they're like this as well. And I think it would serve us well to have some mapping from one sort of out of the strategic plan into the master plan in a way that, particularly you talk about education assessment, that's certainly our strategic plan does a little bit of that.
Yeah,
and other things.
we did talk about that,
Yeah.
that, like you're saying, that overlay and that
Yeah.
braiding
Yeah.
of the plan. The difference that I see with the master plan versus the strategic plan is the master plan is about facilities, but it's about, are those facilities supporting our educational goals? So it kind of extends beyond just brick and mortar, like you're saying. That's where the strategic plan enters into it in terms of looking at, the question of sixth grade, for example, which is still, that report was done and was kind of pushed into the future for the board to look at.
Yeah.
In the context of making that change had potential facilities impacts that the board had to take in and understand prior to making that move. And that was one of the things that we got from our communities in that process was, is losing a sixth grade in a small elementary school the beginning of a decline which can't be made up?
Right.
So I think the strategic plan is going to have to be central to this, but I don't see this as a redundancy because the plan itself right now doesn't speak to some of the fiscal decisions that the board will have to make in the years to come. As we confronted during this past budget cycle, where the plan wasn't really helpful to us in answering some of the questions that came up from our different towns and schools about where do we, if we have to make reductions, where do we remove from?
Another way to look at it is to say that we put systems as a third component of the strategic plan, and you could have a fourth component, which is facilities. So it would be on the same kind of umbrella.
I think I like your idea of sort of, kind of a map or a chart that, as we go through presentations, that tie them together.
Very, very simple, like
Yeah.
one-page
Yeah.
thing, so that folks, because the last
Ostensibly,
thing,
that's what it is, right? Like what you said, it's the fourth
it's the
foundational
fourth
goal.
Yeah.
peg on this
Yeah.
very complicated stool, but it's rather important. I mean, I don't think we had time to get to it in part. It did come up when we were doing the strategic.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I would just say that I think Perry brings up a good point, that when we look at the goals of this, there's not really a spot that talks about cost, finances, tax rates, sustainability, which are the things we're talking about.
Right.
Like, I don't think we should be talking about, I think we need to be very clear what we're doing from the very beginning. to sort of have this conversation.
Yeah, we did go back and forth with that and how to say it. And I know that we had a different iteration of that at one point. It might have been removed in recent months, but we could talk about that. And one of our goals,
Yeah.
how did we say, I can't remember how we said it. I have to look back at prior notes.
Use the word efficient, maybe.
I think we did use the word efficient.
It is, it increased efficiency is one of it.
Yeah.
Where do you see that?
Yeah, the wording right now talks about
Increased efficiency.
Okay.
equity
So it's
and
used,
Yeah.
equity of opportunity and equity of access. And I think implicit is that you can't do that. You can't bring everybody up to, you just can't add more money to get everybody up to the same level. You're going to need to have some sensitivity to cost and, the overall resource. So I think it's indirectly there, but not as clear as you just said it with cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in order to have difficult conversations, it needs to be
A little more explicit.
extremely, we can't get partway down this road and have people feel like they're
Yeah.
not we're not on the level of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put a note under the goals now, just to add something at our next meeting about that. And I see it,
Yeah.
Mary showing it in phase 2, so I don't know if that got pulled from our goals, or if that's was just something that, was, in line with it, but we'll talk about that the next meeting.
It's in phase 1,
Yeah.
not phase 2.
Anybody else with a question or comment? Yes, Mary.
The one thing I thought about, and it's similar to what they just mentioned, we're gonna be in the budget process just as this is going through, right? And we know we're going to have to be looking at a very strict budget next year. So I think it does need to be clear that when we are looking at our budget, we are going to have to be keeping this in mind, that this is a big focal point. So,
All right,
Because we're gonna-
we'll come up with some more direct language that
Yeah.
really speaks to
Yeah,
that.
we waffled on that one.
Yeah.
And something that wasn't shared, but I think, I'm not sure if we brought this to the full board previously, the initial timeline we had set for concluding this process in October.
right,
And as we got into this process, we realized this is much,
Ambitious.
much bigger
Right.
Yeah, it's
than,
unrealistic.
than that. We would have really skimmed the surface of work that needs to be done really, really well. So that's where the
Yeah, when I
timeline
saw that
extended to it.
the decisions would be in the spring, I thought, that's passing the budget.
It is past this budget, yes, but hopefully in time to
Yeah.
make some real changes for next year as opposed to a rushed, say we got done with our, we adopted it, say, in October, that would still be pretty rushed to
Yeah.
really formulate a good plan for changes. So with this one, you have, a good 6 to 8 months to think about some changes that could impact the next budget. And we talked about that the conversations in the fall could certainly open up some thoughts and ideas, that maybe there is something obvious that everybody agrees upon even before we have a stamped master plan, that maybe we wouldn't have thought of without those meetings.
And I think we're, just with the budget cycle, I know we talked about this a few months ago, but we're so used to planning year by year. And let's see how much money we get, and we'll figure out what we can get, what we can't get. And I think this is going to be really critical to help us think ahead to see how different budget years connect to the next one to go towards whatever goals that we set. So
That'd be nice.
I'm hopeful that, and we talked in the committee meeting about Montpelier and the need to be active as things shift at the state level, and they seem like they're always shifting, and there's increased pressure, and we often don't know where the ground is that we stand on.
Right.
So that was something that Chris brought up, which I thought was important for us to consider, not necessarily on a phase here of the master plan, but something that we have to, if our vision is to provide our students with everything they need, some of that probably has to be making sure the state doesn't go awry in terms of supporting us. Because we're all tied together in Vermont really closely.
Steve was first.
Steve, yeah.
So, maybe I'm missing something. You said that this is focused mostly on facilities, and that's where we're talking about cost, and those sorts of things. So is the master plan focused on the district or the district's facilities? I guess is my question. If we're talking about the district as a whole and budgeting, it just kind of seems like if this is focused on facilities, that there's a whole big dance that's going on here.
I would say it is, probably ultimately about facilities. Or let's just say it's gonna have a large impact on it. But if we, let's say we have a bunch of community meetings and we feel, we get a lot of feedback saying, we want kids in, it seems very strong, people want kids in 15 to 20 kid classrooms that are all single graded. Well, sort of the way you have to get there is either spend a lot more money on staff or consolidate into, fewer schools or newer schools. So I think, sort of where we want to go educationally will drive a fair bit of where we need to go facilities-wise. I don't think you can sort of disaggregate the two and that they're separate.
I guess the 2 points that I'm getting at are, and they seem to be, I don't know if nobody wants to mention them or if this is not what this is about. Number one, facilities, this sounds like it's talking about studying whether we're going to close schools. And the second thing is that, as we say every year about the budget cycle, 20% of our expenses are this kind of stuff and 80% of our expenses are staff.
Mm-hmm.
Where's staff in this equation? Or is this not where we address that 80% of the budget? I guess this is what I'm not following. So.
Yeah, I can tell you that our committee's not trying to do any smoke and mirrors. That's not our
No,
goal.
I'm not.
But if it comes off like that, that's important to know because that's how the community will hear it, right? So that's super valuable feedback. Honestly, we feel like we were charged, and that's what we can review as the charge, to evaluate the data that we have about our district, which is the student counts, the staff counts, the state of the facilities, the cost of buses, the cost of what it takes to run a building, what programs do certain students have at certain schools that maybe certain students don't have at other schools. So it's tying in the educational opportunities in the strategic plan to what's the reality, where are we right now, and are we achieving that with the structures that we have in place right now. So we weren't charged with get data that's gonna prove that we should do this. We don't have an end in sight. We were charged with, let's see where we are, let's engage the board and the community with what that looks like, and let's talk about what that means we should have, for options going forward. That's where we're at. Correct me if I'm wrong in that. That's where I feel like our committee is at. And yeah, period. So if we need to sort of redefine how that looks so that can be clearer to the board and the community, I'm happy to talk about that. And that's, I think, I wrote down that there's concern that the language could be confusing between the strategic plan and the master plan, but is there confusion that calling it a master plan is trying to mask something? I'm totally open to editing that. We're formulating posters right now, so I'd like to know what we should put on it.
It's an interesting chicken and egg question.
I'm thinking from two different. The community's going to say, "Wait a minute, does this mean you're closing schools or not closing schools?" And teachers are going to say, "Wait a minute, we're not in this process. Does this mean you're cutting teachers or not cutting teachers?"
Right.
Because those are the two constituent communities that are going to say, "I don't."
How does
I
this
don't
impact
see,
me?
how does this impact me?
Right, right.
And that's what I think that might be a little more clear about your messaging. We're not talking about that stuff,
That's
or
right.
this is exactly what we're talking about, and here's how,
Yeah.
we're approaching that process. So that was just my initial reaction.
Let me
Yeah,
take Perry
really
first.
helpful.
And then you.
Yeah, I was actually gonna say the same thing in a different way, which, things are already gurgling out there as they do in talking about closing schools. And that's the last thing we need, is to have that conversation, instead of doing the right thing, which is to figure out what facilities we have, how they use, what they cost, how can we maintain them. And if something falls out of that, okay, but
Yeah.
if people are, at the first meeting, if they're saying, how come you're closing my school? Then
Right, well, and that's what happened with the sixth grade conversation,
Yeah,
and that is
exactly.
specifically
And that's what
why we
happened
wanted
with
to
the
hold off
Yeah.
and make sure that we
Yeah.
know how we're presenting this,
Yeah.
and that we have a facilitator who can guide those conversations so that it doesn't come across that way,
Yeah.
because that is certainly a concern, and it probably will come up. But it's how can we respond to that in a way that can diffuse it and let people know that we don't have a hidden agenda, that we really just want to do the best for our students in our district, and how do we go about doing that? Let's all talk about how that can happen, because they were all picking on different towns at the budget meetings and had ideas, but let's look at it holistically of all of the data and not just one snippet of what you heard or think about is happening in another school.
I mean, one thing I would add is the genesis of this planning process came out of the sixth grade work last year. And what we found, and what I found from my vantage point, was we reached a point where our educational experts who were working on that question thought it was a good idea to move sixth grade into MUMS, but our communities weren't yet ready to accept. We hadn't done a lot of work. We had done a little bit of work with the communities, but we were a newly formed board, and we didn't yet and couldn't answer the question, which came up in all of those conversations. This is going to be the beginning of the end for our school. So that does have to be fleshed out, I think, in this process. And it was talked about in a number of those forums when we were talking about it, that this is a conversation we need to find a way to have. If we think sixth grade should be at MUMS, but it has other implications elsewhere, how are we going to weight that? And that's where the board, I think, has to be leading this process too, is weighting that. So if we weight how, the impact of losing a grade at an elementary school versus the impact at MUMS versus all the other implications, both cost and educational. I mean, there's some really big issues there.
I think we need to be careful, though.
That's the importance of having this be in a structured process.
And a lot of it depends on how you frame it, because you can also say, if the sixth grade, this is just an example, but if the sixth grade moves to MUMS, what opportunities does that open up?
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, that's the balance, right? Between
Right.
the opportunities and what happens as a result in a smaller school, and and then ultimately, what we should all be focused on is what's best for kids.
There's always gonna be someone out there, no matter how you frame it,
Oh, yeah.
that's gonna say, the first words out of their mouth is, you're just planning on closing schools, because that's what they said when, they did the red conversations. That was the first word out of many people's mouths before they even had the conversation. You're just here to figure out how to close our schools. And I was like, but that's not the topic of conversation, but that was the way they seen it. So,
To be fair, I think we've actually, people may be a little bit more ready for that conversation. I mean, it's unavoidable. We're certainly not going to get around it. And that's really part of what this is designed to address. But we can talk about it in a more positive way of how can we turn a loss into a gain. If we move the sixth grade to MUMS and all of our smaller schools are depopulated, well, maybe it is time to build a new school for all of them, or to turn Mary Hogan's campus into a first-rate elementary school for everybody, or whatever. Or we might even, before this, we might have a policy that says we open up our borders and you can go to any school you want, and people are going to vote with their feet. I mean, that may be part of the master plan.
Could be your recommendation. Yeah.
Anyway, we're just getting our feet wet. Yes, Mary.
One other thought, I love the idea of making sure teachers are involved, because they know what what might work best for a lot of kids. And so other opportunities instead of a typical classroom might work. And so I think the fact that teachers and parents would be very involved in the early part of the decision is a good thing. So,
Are you saying there's another way that, rather than the forums, that we should be involving teachers and stuff?
well, I think they need some, early discussion about, just getting some ideas from them.
Yep.
So that you have some of their thoughts when you do your forums. I don't know how many of the teachers would be able to go to the forums. Some of them live outside of town. But I think we should get some of their thoughts and feelings about what works best for kids.
Yeah.
Because the typical classroom isn't working for every child. And I think having
Oh,
teachers weigh in on that and see what other options there might be.
do you think there would be a way that we could do that before?
I mean, I think we're really talking about a minimum of 3 public forums, but there may be some other
Yeah.
interactions that can go
Smaller.
on.
Yeah.
Well, we have we were talking about having a joint board and community planning group,
Yeah, with teachers
almost like a
maybe?
steering committee for the outreach. I would see that as a great opportunity.
Yeah,
I think the educational part too is a place where we could have a group of teachers and and students and administrators that could come together to talk about some of the pieces of that really, live within the school, not at the board level.
Right. Because it affects them.
Right.
They should be
Right.
yeah.
right in the forefront of it.
Well, and I'm thinking of like what Bjarke was saying. If you had involved us earlier in these conversations, maybe we could have come up with some more innovative ways
Right.
to change staffing or to incentivize people to. And I think that would be a great, way to say we heard what you said, and maybe we can get you involved in some of this work, and they would feel. The results may be the same.
Yeah.
We may come up with the same thing, but I
Absolutely
think
right.
them feeling like they have some agency here,
Right.
that they have some input and some say in what's going on,
Right.
would make them feel a lot better.
Right.
So,
That's great.
Yep.
I still think there's a problem with the naming.
Yeah.
Because I was listening to people say master plan, strategic plan, and you shouldn't have to say, wait, is that this or that? So,
Well, if you got some good ideas for a term other than master plan,
Facility plan.
but then we're being very specific.
That
Yeah.
concerns, it could be
It gets a little too narrow,
even a
yeah.
facilities
Yeah.
master plan concerns me, that people will think that we're just, because it does tie in with the educational goals and IB, the realities of what we're doing, so that's why we didn't want it to just be
Yeah.
about facilities, even though Bob wanted it to. We talked him out of it, so he's probably like, see?
You sold me, it's not.
No, Bob
It
came
is,
around. Bob
it is,
came
if you ever
around.
wanted to have a conversation about facilities, this is probably the committee that's gonna spend
Well, and
a
this
chunk of
will,
time on it, but it's not about facilities alone.
Right.
At least the way you've captured it, it's about you now have a single pool of resource directed to all kids. You wanna make it the access equal and the level of service equal. And that, the big part of that is buildings that house them all. So I don't think you want to move back to calling it facilities like I thought was such a good idea a while back. I think we need to nail.
great idea.
The committee needs to nail an answer to why you have the strategic plan and why you have a
Yeah.
master plan and what their differences are. And I think the committee needs to work on that. I don't think
Yeah.
we've given it our best shot
Yeah.
after the good question was raised. I also think the committee needs to talk about a good, insightful response to, is this about closing schools? Because part of me says
Yeah.
that it's not, the answer is no in the sense of you all aren't starting with the answer and then building a body of information to get to the predetermined thing you want to do. But clearly, when you look at all of the people and buildings and resource you've got towards this pool of kids, it might be that you've got too much given the journey you've been on.
Right,
And so you gotta say it sort of no, but yes.
right.
the answer, I think,
could
to
lead
be
to
honest,
it.
the answer is, it could be,
Yeah,
but it's about a lot more.
right.
But I don't think we want to shy away from it.
No.
Right, I just don't want people to think that we're going in with a preconceived notion that that's what our goal is. Which is why we were, really careful about our goals. and that might be a result of achieving our goals, but that's not our goal.
I think Bob's right. We do need to come up with some
Yeah.
some actual language, and we need to commit to it.
Yeah.
And repeat it often, because it could get away from us.
And it could be asked of any one of us out in public or at a forum, and I think it is important to be on the same page.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
It's that school closing committee, isn't it?
It could just be the school closing plan.
But I mean, it really is. It's
We are on
it's about-
you're on
This is on this morning,
Okay,
right?
we don't mean that.
I mean, it really is about so much more. And frankly, I
Yes.
think that there's great opportunity to be explored. So anyway, in the concern of time here, we have a committee charge written in front of us. I'd like a motion to sort of approve the committee charge
Oh, can I make
as
that motion?
presented. Yep.
I'd like to make that motion.
All right, thank you.
Do you want to put in, or at least the draft I have doesn't have a number of members?
5,
Oh, yes, we
yeah.
updated that.
Oh, it's 5?
Yeah.
5. I'll second it.
Yeah, and
Anything
if you're in an
else?
old version, we also moved everything to, never mind, that was in a different section. Anyway, thank you. Do we have a second?
I did.
Thank you. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And we have given the committee an official charge.
Thank you.
So I did want to follow up on one issue with this. We're going to start, I think we'll start warning these committee meetings as full board meetings so that we don't have a quorum issue. So for example, at our next meeting, I think we're going to get presented the data that we're going to be able to present to the public, and more than just us might be interested in that. So in order not to create a quorum of the board, invite, because Bob had brought that up early on as an issue.
Yeah,
Great.
I don't know whether we want to bring that data to the full board, I mean, as we did tonight.
No, I think he's saying at our committee meeting, if board members wanted to come and listen to
But, yeah.
it.
Yeah,
But
no,
we
but
won't
I'm
have to
saying
kick
we
people
might
out.
But
also
just
be
make
able
that
to
a
have
board.
time after the
Oh,
committee
in
meeting
addition
to
to.
bring here
Oh.
too, just,
Yeah.
we haven't talked about that yet.
Okay.
but-
Well, anyway, we may just start warning it in such a way that we don't have to worry about quorum issues.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to bring forth before the meeting?
I was approached by several staff members, and they were concerned about what's going on with the medical insurance. And I told them that they should, A, talk to you, Peter, and B, if it was serious enough, because some of the things that they were telling me, I'm going, yeah, that sounds like something that somebody should look into, that they should either bring them to you or to the board, but it is happening.
So the people understand, after we negotiated new contracts, everybody moved to high deductible health insurance plans with these health reimbursement accounts that go along with them. That required hiring a third-party administrator to kind of handle all the bookkeeping that goes on with those. That third-party administrator one day just said, we can't do this, and just said, we're done. And so these third-party claims, this is getting reimbursed for the $30 you laid out for a prescription, or in some cases, the $900 you laid out for your prescription. Through VHI, our insurance company, they've helped us move to a different company, but that's all being worked out, and it's tricky. And in some districts, it's a total nightmare. We seem to have avoided at least the total nightmare situation, but
There are stories out there and from here.
Yeah.
So,
we'll have to iron out whether this is basically a union issue to deal with or a district issue to deal with. But I think that this is a temporary problem for which I think there can be creative temporary solutions to help people out. And we've got, potentially support staff who are making $13 an hour, having to go out, put down money, or say it's going to be covered by my third-party administrator. The bill never gets paid. They're getting sent to collections.
or coming to the doctor's office the next time and the doctor's office saying, no, we won't see you because your bill is outstanding.
Yeah,
That's a bad place for us to be in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something that health insurance company, VHI, is very aware of, and they're working night and day to try to dig us out of this hole. It's not necessarily their fault. This company sort of said that they could handle it. There's no way they could
Basically
handle it.
overpromised.
Way overpromised.
Yeah.
And we got a pretty straightforward, good company now, but there's a backlog of issues.
And are the faculty and the staff aware that there's a resolution
Yeah.
in
Well,
the making and that that's not just?
They're
Yeah, I mean,
aware that there's a new third-party administrator.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows kind of what path we're on, so we're mostly switched over at this point. And, you know, I'm part of this too, so I have an HSS and an HRA, but I'm still in the mix, and so I understand some of the issues, because we had to call a number of times to make sure that things were kind of working in the way that we thought they were supposed to. So it was a lot to get your head around at first in terms of this, a new process, as well as the kind of the challenges that future planning,
That's the name of the
were-
company that went out of business.
they weren't processing some claims correctly, and so there was a lot of misinformation at doctors' offices that that just had people confused. So I think I'm seeing a light, but you know, anytime if there are issues, you know, people should contact Gail Leach.
Okay, so they have
Human
somebody to call.
Resources coordinator, yeah, who has been on the phone frequently, just trying to help people figure out where to go next and what to do, and so,
Okay.
yeah. Yep.
It's nice to have somebody full-time assigned to human resources.
Right.
Good
Yeah,
good
that
timing.
was- Yeah, that was good timing.
Never had that before. Perry?
Yes, I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that at our first board meeting in May, we will give you a policy on student freedom of expression in school-sponsored media to review, so you'll be getting that well before the 10 days of warning. And we're hoping that one's an easy one and you'll be happy with it.
Are we taking action on them?
This is for action,
yeah.
yeah. It seems straightforward and
Okay.
just fine, yep. And then at that same meeting, we'd like also to handle the distribution of non-school sponsored literature in schools.
You solved that?
We think Peter and Company solved it, yes.
We'll see about that.
The policy is fairly straightforward and readable. It's 5 paragraphs. I think the key for the parents who are concerned is the stuff that we don't write, thankfully, which Peter and Company will deal with, the procedures for how it's going to work. But we expect both of those to be done by next Wednesday. Did I get it right? Today's Monday, yeah. In 10 days from now, to be warned in time for our first meeting in May. And then we decided today that on the 4th of June, our first meeting in June, we'll give you probably 9 things at once, not to close on, but to the sort of first pass when discussing the governance stuff. And a number of the things in our norms overlap, so there's a lot of good stuff. I think it's a nice package, and we think June will give us time to digest it a bit, and then if we have a retreat, we can talk more about it if we want to. Or it's easy, you just vote for it, and we're done. Thank you.
All right. How about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
We stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.